Hello and welcome to part 2 in this series of overlocker threading videos. In the last video, if you haven't seen that, it goes through the just sort of preparing your overlocker for use after it hasn't been used for a while, or if you just wanted a refresher. I go through making sure that the threads stand and threads are set up correctly on the back here. And just little basics like suggesting that the needles be changed and bits and pieces like that. But yeah, take a look at that video if you haven't seen it. This part 2 will be covering threading of the machine. And Molly the cat decided to make an appearance, so hopefully she won't get sort of caught up in the works there. She might be a bit of a pain. The first thing really is to just bring your threads up through your top loops here. That's pretty much where I always start. Let's just bring those over. Some machines will have little loops like this, others will have holes, so you'll need to thread from back to front because the thread needs to come to the front. And just a lot of them though have these little hoops that you can just lay the thread in. So I get all the threads ready to thread into the second lot of loops, I guess you could call it. All machines are different, so it would be a really good idea if you could get hold of the manual. If you don't have it, just have a look online, maybe you can find one there. And quite often they'll definitely have the threading diagrams in there, so it's quite handy to have those threading diagrams. This particular machine has these little loops here, just slide in like that, and you'll notice there's slots down the top of the top cover here. That's where the thread lays in there. So I'll go ahead and do that for all of the threads. Generally lower looper is the very right hand thread, and then you've got the top looper is generally the second one in from the right, and then your right needle is generally the second slot in from the left, or second position from the left, and your left needle is generally the very left. For a 4-thread overlocker, a 3-thread generally would be these three here. Ignore the red. That would be a 3-thread. It's actually probably easier if you're having trouble to ignore one of the needles and just thread it in 3-thread. I'll show you how to do that, and in fact we'll do that right now. So let's just ignore the left needle. Right, so we're going to set this up in 3-thread mode. You can use either the left needle or the right needle depending on how wide you want your seam to be if you do go into 3-thread mode. So if we were to go into 3-thread mode and using the right hand needle, the blue, we would get a narrow seam there between the blue and the edge. If we were to go to 3-thread and using the left needle only, the red, we would get a wider seam. So it really depends how wide you want your seam to be. And the main difference between a 4-thread and a 3-thread is a 3-thread is really only ever used for tidying up edges. It's not strong enough. It's not strong enough as a construction seam. What's called a construction seam is this sort of seam here, where that might be the, for instance, the side seam of a shirt. Right, you want that to be strong because it's taking weight, and strain. So it's going to take this lateral strain here. 4-thread is designed for that, so you can get away with a single seam down there with a 4-thread, and it creates a construction seam. 3-thread is not good enough. You can sew 2-piece fabric together. So you can go down what's going to be your construction seam, you say your side seam of your shirt, and then you'd need to go down with a straight sewer, plain, like a you're just a straight stitch from a normal machine, and that gives it the strength, whereas 4-thread does it all in one. Okay, but sometimes it's quite handy to have 3-thread, so I'll set this one up 3-thread to start with, and then we'll go to 4-thread after that. It just simplifies things a little bit too. If you're having trouble, sometimes it's quite a good idea just to drop it down to 3-thread and get that right, and then you introduce another needle, and that just makes the troubleshooting a little bit easier. Right, so we've got a bit of a tangled mess here, but I'll sort that out. So in this particular machine, we've got these slots at the top here, and in behind here there will be the tension discs. So that's the 2 discs that the thread goes between. It gets clamped, and that sets the tension. With the dial, which is a so the lower the number here, the looser the tension is. There's a spring in here that clamps the 2 tension discs together, and so the higher you go on the numbers, the tighter the spring gets and pushes the 2 tension discs together harder. So if you're starting from scratch, and someone's messed with all the tension dials, your general rule of thumb is sort of go midway. So you've got 10 on here, so well, the loopers maybe a little bit lower. I would say start at around 3, and you can see with the discoloration of this machine where the tension's been set. So you can see that the sun's been on it, and it's worn it's discoloured this plastic here. So you can kind of judge there where generally it's been set. But I would start around 3 or 4 for the loopers, for the 2 loopers, your bottom looper and your top looper. Okay, and then this machine has got a little mechanism here that you push down, and what that does is it separates the tension discs so that the thread falls down in between the tension discs properly. What can happen is if the tension discs have got tension on them, the thread will not go down in between the discs properly. The thread will just sort of lie around the outside of the disc, and so you'll get an incorrect tension. But this machine and some other machines have a little tension release, and that means that the thread will fall down in between the discs properly and get clamped properly. Another way of dealing with that, if you don't have this tension release here, is when you're threading down into or around your tension discs, and you're worried that the thread's not going in between the discs properly, not being clamped, you can hold back with so just clamp here with your before the thread comes into the tension disc. Hold that tight and grab the thread here and pull, and that pulls it down, slides it down in between the discs. And then when you've got that far, you can get a fairly good idea that there's a little bit of tension on here just by pulling the thread. And just by getting to know your machine and a little bit of experience, you'll get to know how much tension should be roughly on there. I mean, we're sort of just roughly setting this up at the moment for tension. But that if it's really loose, like if I hadn't, say I'd just done that and just sort of laid that in and pulled, that's really loose. I mean, it's hard to convey here, but that's loose as anything. And if I use the tension release or pull, you'll see the thread pull down into the disc. Now I can feel that that's got a little bit of tension. Generally the lower loopers don't have a lot of tension on them. There's a bit there, that's just needed for control. The 2 needle threads, they will be quite a bit tighter. They have heavier springs in them. So yeah. So we'll start with you should really start with the upper looper for threading. So I haven't gone too far with that one. I've just left that. We'll just leave that there. That's the lower looper. Upper looper is your probably your first place to start threading. You can start with the lower looper. You just have to be a little bit careful. But generally if you start with the upper looper you'll have no problems at all. So I'll just thread through the little guide at the back there. I'm just going to hold back on the thread, pull it down through the slot into the discs there, and then down through this little guide. If we have a look here, here's the tension discs up here. I've just repositioned the camera there. So tension discs up here, and we've got some guides down here, and you'll see there's a threading diagram that's inside the front door there. Now these are really handy for a quick reference. So you'll see that we've got a purple type coloured thread here, right hand, that's the lower looper. The bluey colour is the upper looper, and the yellowy colour is the right needle and the green is the left needle. Now that doesn't correspond to the colours that I'm using on the actual machine. So, but just be aware that they're quite often inside the front cover, these threading diagrams. So if you don't have the manual, sometimes you can follow this and work it out. So I'm just going to open up the front of the machine here. Also make sure you're turning your machine in the correct direction. Always. You'll notice here that this one's got an arrow here indicating that that's a counterclockwise rotation. Quite a lot of overlockers will have the opposite. They will be clockwise, especially industrials. They're pretty much all clockwise. So just be aware of that. Sometimes the little arrow is marked on the case itself. If you're not sure, just plug the machine in and just give it a little slight tap on the foot controller, and that'll let you know what way the rotation is. So I'm going to start by threading the upper looper. Now this is the upper looper here. You can see it dips right down under the plate here and then comes up, crosses over with this looper and comes up and over, and the needles come down the back of it. That's the upper looper. The lower looper is this one here, right? He always stays under the plate, just goes back and forward like that. So first of all, let's thread this upper looper. As I say, this machine's extremely easy to thread, so we'll go through the first loop here. That's on the diagram. The first loop is this little loop here, that's this bar here, right? And then you'll see this loop here, that's that one. That loop there, it's got the slot underneath it, that's this one here. And then there's the loop here, that's that one. And then straight up through the eye of the looper, that's up here. Okay, so these have got little one-way clips on them. So this little guide here, this little guide has a sort of a one-way clip system where you can see that the bar comes around and then but finishes there. There's a little gap in there. You'll see that you can just pull the thread in like that, and of course it won't come back out. It's designed not to come back out. And so there's quite a few of those loops on this machine. So let's just follow the instructions there. There's another one of these loops here. One there, one there. Oh, that down from the top. And one really handy tip is especially with loopers, you can't do this with needle eyes, but you can do it with the eyes of loopers, is the temptation is to snip your thread, and you've got a nice tidy edge there, and you can thread that through your looper, and that's probably okay with this top looper. We've got a nice clean thread there that we can get through the eye there. But I find if you want a little bit of sort of stiffness so that you can guide the thread easier, is you double the thread over like that into a loop and then just twist it, and that gives you sort of a stronger, it's not going to bend so easily and sort of cause problems when you're trying to get it through the eye of the looper. And that's quite handy for threading the lower loopers. So I use that as a little tip. Always do it. So you can go through the top looper there. Like so. So that's the top looper done. I'll do the lower looper next. And basically it follows the same path, which is quite unusual. Quite often the lower looper will take, well, it doesn't follow, it follows the same path up to here. And then you'll see another little loop down here. And you can just pull in like that. And this particular machine, this is the lower looper here. You can see that moving there. So you'll notice there's a little cutout here, and that makes it really easy for threading, but quite often there will be an eye there, a little hole that you'll need to thread. Generally the hole goes from the back of the looper through and comes out the front here, so you have to get your thread, you know, I do the old trick, double it over there, and you thread the thread back through the, you know, from left to right through the eye there and comes out the front. But this is a very nice design where you can just hook it over like that, and you know the thread comes up to where it should be here. So next thing to do is to thread the eye of the looper. So I'll just bring that across so it's easy to see. Twist my thread over, and we want to go through front to back like that. Now you'll see that I'm actually going in between, which is not right. I'm going in between the top thread, the top looper here, and the looper itself. So that's not good. That shouldn't be. I shouldn't be in between these. So that's just a matter of positioning. I probably, if I just bring the machine back, it'll untangle. I want to get that out of there. Right, now it's free of the top thread. You can see there that they're not catching at all. This is free here. You just want to make sure that the thread, when it comes out the back of the eye, that it's not going to catch on anything or be sort of caught in between anything else. So your two threads you want to sort of come out to the side here. Normally the press foot would be on here. I've got that off just to make it easier to see, but you bring your two threads back like that, okay? And you're ready pretty much to go. Oh, the other thing about the colours of the thread is the hardest colour to thread is black. It's, you know, it's terrible to thread these lower loopers, especially if you've got a machine that's a little bit more difficult to thread. So what you can do is you can thread in white or a pale colour, so you can see what you're doing. You know, you can see the thread and get it through the eyes and whatnot. And then once you're done there, you can put, tie black on and pull the black through. I'll show that in another video. I'm not going to cover that in this part at this stage. So that's the two loopers threaded. Well, I'm actually just going to do one needle. I'm going to do the right hand needle, so I'm just doing as I did before with the loopers. I'm going to set the tension up quite high, probably around 4 or 5 on this one. I can feel by pulling that there's a reasonable amount of tension there. And this particular machine is just a loop here, a loop there, over this loop here, and through the little guide here, and straight down through the needle. This particular machine has one needle set screw holding both needles. So when taking a needle out, as soon as you loosen this screw, both the needles are going to want to fall out. So just hold the needles, loosen the screw, hold the needle that you want to stay in and pull the other one out, being careful not to hit the point of the needle on the plate or anything like that. As soon as you hit the needle on a hard surface, it damages it to the point where it's probably quite blunt. So just get yourself another needle if you do that. Get a brand new needle. Okay, still holding onto that needle there. Screw the screw back up. Some machines have a needle set screw for each needle. So in that case you would have only have had to loosen the left hand needle set screw, remove the needle. What you've got to be careful of is if you do that, the left screw would be loose and vibration can cause it to fall out. So tighten the screw. This is if you have two individual set screws there. So tighten in the screw that's not being used, and so that way it won't fall out. Okay, and then so we've just got this needle thread to go through the eye there. Just cut that off. Get your tweezers. You just wouldn't thread an overlocker without tweezers. It's just about impossible. Threading the needles is probably okay to do without tweezers, but the loopers would just about be impossible. So there we go. We're actually set to start sewing there. Okay, we're pretty much ready to test sew here. It's quite a good idea to test the machine just by turning over by hand, just in case anything's wrong. You'll pick it up. You don't really want to go putting your foot down. If there's something wrong, you might damage the machine. But I'll just turn the machine by hand and we'll see that it's going to start chaining off, which is exactly what we want to see. A few turns by hand. Seems okay, sounds good. There's nothing sort of awry there, so probably give us some power. And that's what you should see. You should see a nice just chain out like that. You can do this without the presser foot on, there's no problem there. So we'll just put everything back together here and we'll do a wee test. So put the presser foot back on. Press the foot down and we should be set to go. And there we go with a narrow 3-thread. Some people would tell you off for bringing the thread around and running over itself like that to cut it. Most machines will handle that. I don't see a problem with it. Some machines, if they snarl up, you would stop doing that and use your scissors out the back here to cut your seam off like that. Cut the chain off. Okay, so if we want to go for the wide stitch, let's say you want a wider stitch, you can then just use the left needle. So we'll take the right needle out and just swap it over to the left, but we also need to thread the left needle too. It's a slightly different configuration. So we'll just pull the thread. Just be careful to not cut your looper threads, otherwise you'll be re-threading again. But you know, if you're not in a hurry to get a job done, having to re-thread your machine's not such a bad thing really. It's quite good practice. In fact, if you've got any spare time, it's probably quite a good idea just to, if you're confident enough to do it, and you've got the manual and all the threading diagrams, so just go ahead and completely unthread the machine and rethread it as a practice run. And so I'm just going to swap this needle over to the left position. Make sure when you're inserting needles that the needle goes right to the stopper. You can feel it hit the stopper. And also make sure your needle's in the correct way. Now most domestic sewing machines will have a needle with a flat on the back of it. Like that. That's the flat surface. There's the rounded part of the shank there. Now the flat surface goes to the back normally on an overlocker, generally on a domestic. And this particular machine takes standard domestic sewing machine needles. Some models take a slightly different type of needle, but again, look at the manual or have a look on the internet or have a chat to your mechanic. But generally they take the standard domestic needles. So I'm just going to pull the blue thread out completely because that's for the right needle. And I'm going to thread the left needle in red. So let's pull that down through the discs, through a little loop here, over this, through the little thread guide, and then thread front to back. And we should be set to go there. I'll just turn over by hand. Until it sort of starts to chain. Now it's stopped chaining. Yeah, the left needle may not chain as well as the right needle, depends on your machine, but this one's a little bit fussy. But I'd be tempted just to go ahead and start sewing there. Put the press foot back on. As you can see, removing the press foot is actually quite handy if it's easy enough to do. Some of the burnettes, they have a system where you can push the presser foot sort of swivels out of the way, so it turns out of the way. It's quite handy. We'll start here. Just slowly to start with until you get things underway. Chaining better now that it's coming straight out the back under the presser foot. Yep, it's looking pretty good. Tensions need a little bit of adjustment now. So this is the top looper, the sort of fawny coloured thread. It's a little bit tight. You can see that it's pulling the bottom thread, the white bottom thread, it's pulling it round onto the top off the edge seam here. And that indicates that the top thread's probably a little bit too tight. You could get away with probably loosening the top looper thread slightly. Just loosened it. I went from 3 to 2. Tensions is a whole other subject I'll cover. And there we go, that's looking better. It could probably do with still a little bit more tweaking. It's just a matter of balancing this meeting place here where to the edge of the fabric. You can see it's still coming across a little bit. It could probably go looser on the top, or you can actually tighten the bottom a little bit, and that'll pull the white around to the edge more. So I'm taking the lower looper up to 4 from 3 just to see if I can get that that looking a bit better? And that is looking a little bit better. Although it's starting to pull a little bit tight now, I might have gone too far. It's a bit of a balancing act, but I'm not going to go too in depth with tensions at this stage. So that's 3 threads. So now 4 thread, we'll install the second needle, the right hand needle there now. So we'll start by loosening the needle set screw, and if you have a machine that's got the separate set screws, you would loosen the right hand set screw and install the right hand needle, making sure it's right up to the stopper, and to up the set screw, and then just thread like so. Depending on what your machine threading is. This one's pretty easy. And then thread that needle. So we're now set for 4 thread here. Install the presser foot. And there we have 4 thread. So quite easy to convert between 3 and 4. Just remove a needle and a thread to go from 4 to 3 thread, and vice versa. And that's the cat waking up. The next video is going to be, in the series, will be troubleshooting threading issues, a major threading issue. So thanks very much for watching, and goodbye from Molly. Say hello.